All right, welcome back to a bonus episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So, without further ado, let me tell you what we're doing right now. We're getting ready to release some of the archive that we found from when we were the sci-fi shenanigans. We're going to get those up there for the posts that were brought down. We thought you might enjoy them, and so without further ado, let us roll that beautiful. Oh wait, they're going to sue me. Play it.
Hey, all you crazy sci-fi fans. Time for your daily dose of insanity over here at the Sci-Fi Shenanigans podcast with your hosts, J.R. Handley and me, Chris Winder. Just two nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions. A place where the sky's the limit, space is the place, and nerds run the world. Without further ado.
All right, and thank you for listening today. We have a special guest for you, author Tim C. Taylor, who I sometimes refer to, if you follow me on my Facebook or my blog, as Boss Man. Tim Taylor is a British science fiction and fantasy author. He's the creator of the best-selling Human Legion series, the former owner of Greyheart Press, which still publishes some of the legacy contracts that they have, and the publisher of My Sleeping Legion series. So, yay! So Tim,
hi there.
Did you want to tell us anything about yourself that we missed as far as an introduction goes? Did we cover it all?
I think that pretty much covers it all, I think. Yeah.
Outstanding. So first, let's start with science fiction generally. We like to ask the guests the first time what you love about science fiction.
Okay. Well, I like to live in a world that's not quite the one that we live in. I must admit it. I encountered so much great science fiction that blew my mind when I was a kid that I find that fiction set in the real world just seems a bit too mundane, really. I just love the excitement of space and adventure and great big galactic-wide stakes. Brilliant stuff.
I like the explosions. So
yeah, very big ones. Galaxy-sized.
So what's your first memory of watching or reading or playing games in the science fiction genre?
Well, it all happened for me in a sort of concentrated point around about 1977, 78. In a short space of time, I read 2000 AD comic, which has got Judge Dredd and people going back in time to harvest the dinosaurs because we're all running out of food and all sorts of things like that. Doctor Who was on the telly, definitely Tom Baker, Doctor Who. Star Wars, the first film. I watched that on my 8th birthday, and that was absolutely brilliant. And around that time, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then not far after that was Traveller role-playing game. So that was all happening very, when you're 7 or 8 or 9, it's all very intense, those memories. So that really is what set me up, I think. Blake 7 as well, brilliant stuff when you're 8 years old. Yeah.
Now, speaking of Dungeons and Dragons, were you usually the dungeon master or a player?
Well, I had 2 older brothers and an even older cousin, so I guess not.
Okay.
Not on the original, not to start with. So, I did used to play a little bit later some of the Fantasy Trip. I don't know if any of you remember that one. That was a little bit later. Steve Jackson was one of the designers of Steve Jackson games, and that was very good for solo stuff. It became what was known as GURPS.
Okay.
So yeah, and that also was borrowed some ideas, I suspect, from Traveller. So we remember in Traveller, we were always rolling there for your character classes and your campaigns and so on. It's actually the last sort of few years I realised that things like Traveller and 2000 AD has really influenced what I've been writing the last few years. I just didn't really realise at the time. Great stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that's his favorite question. He has Chris has this theory that the people that are drawn to being the dungeon master also tend to be the same people that like to tell the stories, hence becoming writers.
Yeah, well, yeah, and unfortunately, my brother sort of went off and did other things, so I ended up, about 7 or 8 years later on, I was doing the dungeon design and then doing stuff at school. So yeah, I definitely saw that as a progression. I used to create sort of dungeon designs, and then I used to write music. I used to write software, and I write books. To my mind, it's the same bit of my head that's what he started off with designing dungeons back in the sort of about 1980.
Sure, it's all creation.
Yeah. But you can feel the same part of the brain working. It's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
So did you ever do the choose your own adventure sort of Dungeons and Dragons type books as well when you were a kid?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the Car Wars ones as well.
Car Wars.
A bit obscure, but I love those. And in fact, I bought one yesterday. I didn't even know it existed. I found it in a shop for £1, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Do Your Own Adventure. So I'm going to look forward to doing that this weekend.
Excellent.
I didn't know those. That was a thing.
I had no idea. No.
So does that mean you're going to be releasing some Human Legion Choose Your Own Adventures?
Ooh, good question.
I'd love to. Yeah.
That would be fun.
I think there's software now that enables you to do it, because I'd imagine it would be a lot of post-it notes and lots of bits of paper scrawled trying to figure out you've actually covered everything and there's no sort of link stuff. But I'm sure I've seen software it can actually print out the whole map of the game.
Huh.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, I'd love to do it.
Could you imagine the nightmare that would be for Amazon, though, if like your first choice gets you dead and you jump right to the last page? Their algorithms and their KU stuff would go insane. I don't know if Amazon's ready for that.
They probably only work in print.
Yeah, I don't know. I was always the guy that cheated and jumped back and forth to see what would happen.
I don't know. I've not done it on an ebook, but I mean the hyperlinks should all work well, I should think.
Well, the issue is
that's true.
with the Kindle Unlimited and people doing the page stacking. So they'll fluff it in the middle with a bunch of short stories, and then as soon as you finish the whatever, you hit the now find out more, and it jumps you to the last page to get all those page reads between. And so Amazon has some, I imagine, some sort of way to try to track that. And so I could see a choose your own adventure messing with those, security features to catch people trying to game the system.
Definitely worth the risk there.
Yeah, I mean, it could be good. I don't know, Chris, you haven't met him, but Corey Truax, the guy that edited some of my Sleeping Legion stuff, is also a veteran, but he's working on a choose your own adventure story as well. So they're becoming more popular, and I've seen a couple that were romance choose your own adventures, which is definitely interesting.
Very interesting.
Now that is interesting. Yes.
So my wife found it when she was perusing for her next read. So anyway, that was sort of a detour I didn't expect. So
choose your own romance.
Yeah. But do we go with Bob or Jim? But all right. So I've obviously worked with, before I worked with you as a writer in your universe, I was obviously a fan. And so this is a question that I've wanted to ask you, but hasn't been come up in any of the interviews I've seen. So when you first wrote Marine Cadet, which was your first novel, I know you said you wrote it sort of on a lark, as a whim, but where did the idea come from, do you think?
When I first had an idea, let's write some fiction because I might enjoy that. Which is 2001. The idea behind the idea of the million children being offered up as tribute and this sort of the setting, that was my first idea in the first half hour of trying to do some writing. So that's 2001. It was about 2010 I started on that what will become a Marine Cadet. But I'd already written 2 novels and had several stories published in magazines that were in that same setting, but they weren't necessarily to do with the military side of things. So this is what was going on in the background. But what the story with Marine Cadet is then 5 centuries later, and it's the story of how the descendants of those million children have their time and their struggle for freedom. But there are other stories as well, and I've actually been doing them since 2001.
Every time you say 2001, I'm thinking of a Space Odyssey. I guess I'm too much of a nerd.
I never saw that before. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it was inevitable, wasn't it? I was going to start in 2001.
It was. So the story set before, is that something you plan on publishing as sort of an omnibus on the ones that were in magazines when you get the rights back?
Yeah, it's always a question of, well, what's the thing I need to do next? I'm definitely going to do it at some point. Let me see. There's the anthology I did a few years ago, Empire of War. That was a story set about 50 years into this setting. It's about 450 years before Marine Cadet.
Okay.
So that's in that anthology. So I need to stay there for a little while. But definitely, what I actually originally started was not 500 years later. I started writing a story of what was happening at the first contact point, which is about roughly 50 years in the future. I always keep that a little bit vague, or else it goes out of date. So that's what I started, and I realized that I thought I got an excellent story, but I hadn't got the skills as a story writer back in 2001. So I put that on hold and started writing short stories, and I haven't come back off hold yet. But I mean, it's one of those things with the Marine Cadet. I'm always making reference to things that happened 500 years ago, like President Horton and so on. Well, I've actually written him. I know him quite well as a character because I've written a lot about him. It's just never been published.
Okay. I know a lot of the story ideas that became the Sleeping Legion. Actually, most of those seeds were from your first book, things that you had set up to potentially be something, and then the story went in another direction. So you definitely littered the stories with potential to be some other stories as well. Now, was that intentional, do you think, or was that just sort of happened through the course of writing the story?
Well, it's a bit of both. I think I do sometimes struggle to rein in my ideas, I guess. I have lots of ideas. Let's have a bit over here and a bit over there. And sometimes you think, well, I want to really concentrate a bit more on the key events. So what's the story I'm really telling here? But in other cases, I am intending to tie them up. So when it comes to the final book in the series, which I've got a rough draft complete of, there's an awful lot of tying together things that have been thrown up early on in the series but haven't really been resolved. So, for example, there's the suggestion that there's been a rip in reality and one of the characters actually has met their future self. Well, that's never really been answered what on earth that's all about, but it does get answered in spades in the final book. Also, I think one of your personal favourites, JR, is the first book. The protagonist, Aaron McKeown, he's implanted with a pheromone device to communicate with this sort of alien insectoid race called Drogs, and that has been used, but it's not used as much as it's going to be in the sixth book. So he's talked in the first one about being the queen of the ants as a joke. Well, I put that in there with the intention of doing something with that, and I'll definitely do that in the sixth book.
Outstanding.
So a bit about
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, I've noticed that the Human Legion series and the Revenge Squad series have similar layouts on their covers. Are they related?
Yeah. So Revenge Squad is it's set towards the end of between the fifth and sixth books of the main series. It's happening somewhere else. It's a frontier world where soldiers are being settled, are being retired, have done their tour of duty, and it's a lot of tension between a lot of different races. And it was my attempt to, because I picked up the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher only quite recently, about a couple of years ago, and I love those books so much. I've read them all now. I thought I want to do that sort of thing in space. So it was an attempt to do a kind of almost an urban fantasy in my own sort of space opera setting.
Well,
I love it.
So yeah, definitely. So there's enough connections that you will get. So there's one character actually who's in the Human Legion who's also in this series, but a very minor character in the first series. But yeah, hopefully you don't need to read any of the Human Legion, but if you have, you will see some references, and add to the enjoyment, hopefully.
Well, the other thing is the whole retirement and settle out the retired soldiers. He was right about the time he started working on that. He was touring some of the Roman ruins in Britain, so I think there's a correlation there, but I don't know if he knows it. So I remember him sending him sending Corey and I some pictures he took when he was out and about.
You have a burnt helmet. Yeah, that's from my hometown, where the Celtic Queen Boudica burnt the place to the ground. So there's lots of archaeology goes on in my hometown, and always they talk about this layer of black, which is a little ways down. That's the Boudican destruction layer, where the whole area was completely burnt.
So
wow,
it's I remember right as he was telling me about the story that he was touring those, and I was like, oh, I wonder if there's a connection. So
yeah, burn it all to the ground. Yeah.
So
where I come from.
I see that your series, you've got your 6th and final book coming out. When do you expect to be able to wrap that all up?
Well, I'm not going to say a date because it should have been out, to be quite honest. But I kind of got a little bit on a sidetrack to write a book for someone else. So I'm hoping March. So I've got a rough draft already finished. So the story's done, but it does need tidying up, definitely. So I'm going to finish this Four Horsemen novel I'm doing at the moment, and then the next thing is get this tidied and get it out, because I'm really excited about it, and I'm desperately keen to finish on a nice conclusion.
So one of the reasons I asked that, Chris, is that my characters sort of in his world diverged when they left the one system, and mine was the story of what happened when they left. And so at the end of my series, they sort of sail off into the wild blue yonder to meet back up with his. So I'm curious to see what he does with some of those characters.
Yeah. Well, when we first talked about our two series, we were very vague about what would happen at the very end. We needed to settle things on the planet where you were doing most of your story, but I didn't quite know then what would happen to join up, so it'll be a bit vague, but I thought that's not good enough, is it? So yeah, your journey you have at the end of your series, it does lead somewhere, and some of your characters do end up in the final book, which is rather odd. So you've used some of my characters, and then you've made your own, and I've now taken some of your characters. So it's a very strange circular way of doing things.
Yeah,
it works, I think.
I think that's one of the things when people ask me about the differences in writing in other people's worlds is because I've done the Four Horsemen. Chris has written in that anthology with us as well. So we've written we've written in Mark Wandry and Chris Kennedy's world, and now obviously I've written in yours. And yours was a lot more challenging only because you cared so much more. So I remember I was using one character that, I saw it as a minor character. I think you mentioned him a couple of times, and you were like, no, that is not what he would do. And you would give me all this backstory of a character that, was so minor to most people. But for you, he was like, no, he was real. So I think the passion, though, definitely shows in what you write.
Right, I hope so. I mean, I would struggle really to write a story that I wasn't enjoying myself.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
But it definitely shows through. And he does try very, very hard to write with the American spellings, but sometimes. So the only other thing...
There's more to it than a spelling.
The other thing we're working on him with, Chris, is he likes to drink his beer warm for some reason. And we both know that beer is supposed to be drink cold, as God intended.
Right. Should be drunk as God intended. We're just misinterpreting the message. Yeah. Cellar temperature. It should be cellar temperature.
I have a question. I've noticed some differences between writing on different sides of the pond, and I'm wondering, looking back on this book series of yours, since you live in an area where if a building is 100 years old, it's pretty new. Where if it's 100 years old on our side of the pond, it's an antique, and historians want to learn about it, and it's only 100 years old. Have you noticed that just the environment you live in makes your writing different than other people's?
It's a very good question, and I think the answer is it surely must do, but there's no reason why I would necessarily be able to articulate what's different. I mean, yeah, there is a sense of deep time. I mean, as I say, I've just sort of joking about Colchester where I grew up, but I mean that was an important place over 1,000 years ago.
Wow.
And you just walking around town, and there are walls and so on. The defences built by the Romans. There's about AD 100. Boudica and the destruction layer. It's all around. There's a big siege there in the 17th century. I remember my brother got a metal detector for a present one year at Christmas, and we went out in the local green, and we found a couple of coins and some cannonballs.
Wow.
And I think, right, everywhere you go, there's this stuff going on. I think it probably does. It might affect us a little bit. I think the bigger difference, because I've been thinking about this morning, and I think the biggest difference I can see alters the way perhaps British writers see things, is to do with the relative size of the UK and US. I think there's a tendency to have a little bit more self-confidence in being able to tackle the really big projects, if you like, over on your side of the pond. And one of the things I've seen with British authors is a tendency to say, well, we need to go and do things in alliance with other people. So go off and join NATO rather than go off and put a man on the moon, which obviously you do. We couldn't imagine Brits putting their own man on the moon. In fact, it's a sort of staple of very British science fiction, the idea of an independent British space program, which did exist until the early 60s, is a bit of a joke, because it's not really quite imaginable. And I think that does actually work its way inside your view of the world.
I can see that, because surrounded over the British history, surrounded by so many enemies and so many allies, you had to rely on the allies because there were so many enemies around.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was a period of time where I think that wasn't quite such the case, but that was all, that ended with the Second World War, really.
Right.
So that was all gone and dusted with before I was born. Not that old.
So you've said that your sixth book in the series is basically outlined, and as soon as you can get back to it, you will be prepping it for publication. So before we talk about your other non-Human Legion stuff, what are your plans for the universe when you finish the main series?
Well, I do have lots of possible spin-off series that I've thought of. So that, just to be clear, the sixth book will be a definite conclusion. It will tie up lots and lots of things. Revenge Squad was an attempt to do a spin-off. That certainly is one of them. But at the moment, the favourite is to do something I'm calling Chimera Company. So this is set a long way in the future, maybe 1,000 years in the future, and in a very distant part of the galaxy. Yet it is a continuation, and some of the themes you see in the Human Legion, sort of different splits between. I mean, at the moment, if you've read up to the end of the fifth book, there's something of a split taking place within the Human Legion. Well, that actually affects what the society that we see in this Chimera Company, but it's a smaller scale thing, and rather than the big sort of empires and politics and stuff. And I'm actually quite very much enjoying the Galaxy's Edge books at the moment. And I guess just as I read the Dresden Files and thought, I like this, why don't I write something a bit like this? And ended up taking some of the sort of enjoyment I had from it and then putting my own sort of spin on it. I might do something a little bit similar with this Chimera Company. It's a bit more, I can put a bit more adventure, a bit more pulpy, perhaps. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, because I know you're Galaxy's Edge fans. I mean, one of the things about Galaxy's Edge is, well, the different books, they're not all the same. They've got quite different few things. So perhaps the second one, was that Galactic Outlaws? Is that the second one?
I think so.
Yeah. So that sort of sense of fun, which I very much picked up in the 70s and 80s from 2000 AD, I think maybe that little touch of comic book style, little bit sort of pulp space opera adventure, and yet it's set in something related to the Human Legion.
Okay.
I look forward to reading.
And one of the things, I hope I enjoy writing them. So it's still, I sat down for the first time in my favourite writing pub last Monday. So Monday nights is my definite go to the pub, drink beer at the correct temperature, because I do serve it well there, and then just write. Just work out decent ideas. So I was really pleased. I just came up with all these great ideas about how this setting would work and where things would go. So I'm thinking at the moment, and I'm going to talk it over with some people at the 20 Books London event coming up in a couple of weeks, of doing this as a maybe sort of 10,000 word episodes, one a week.
Oh, wow.
Which I sort of batch up and then. I'm finding I'm tending to write in 10,000 word or thereabouts in chunks like that, and I think it's a good way to get the pace going. And in part, I remember when I used to subscribe to 2000 AD, I ran out of space to do it, to be honest, in the house. I would be reading a science fiction novel, and I'd be enjoying it, but then the 2000 AD comic would come through the door, and you could be certain I would have read that by the end of the evening. And that's the sort of thing I want to do. I can sort of fit in, that special little smallish, but enough in there to really excite people. And on a weekly basis, it's a regular thrill, as the alien editor of 2000 AD might call it.
Well, they did. Craig Martell and Scott Moon are doing something similar with their Dark Landing. I think it's like 30 to 40,000. I mean, 30,000 on the more regular end, and they're just producing every, I think they said every 18 days. So they queued up a couple in advance.
Yeah.
And that seems to.
Wow, that's brave.
Yeah, they seem to be doing okay. As far as sales.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite worried that people will, inevitably, some people say it's too short, it's a bit of a rip-off. But I'm not as fast a writer as they are, and I think 10,000 for me, that suits me as a reader and a writer. So I'm be meeting Craig Martell actually in London in a couple of weeks. So you'll be sure I'll be talking with him about exactly that.
Yeah, Chris and I are intending to try to make the next year, the 2018. So I guess it's this year now, but try to make the 20 books in Vegas one. So
yeah,
but I think.
Yeah, it did look really good.
I think the Dark Landing stuff, at least, their first one is basically 70 pages, if I remember correctly, and it was like 99 cents. And then their second one, which is about the same, is $2.99. The second one is 90 pages. But I imagine they're doing most of they're counting on the Kindle Unlimited, so people will be willing to overlook the size.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I did go ahead and do this 10,000 words, I would it would need to be in Kindle Unlimited. And of course, there's no incremental cost for readers.
Right. And then I guess, if cost is an issue, as soon as they're done, I imagine at some point they would be able to bundle them for.
Oh yeah, I'd definitely bundle them, have a series end and box sets and all that sort of stuff.
So
definitely. So anybody who wants to read it can read it in the way they want to. And I'm still surprised the number of people who buy in paperback. So some people prefer it. So fine. That you wait till I've done 6 episodes or something, and that's a halfway point on series 1. Then I will immediately read the paperback.
Okay.
Good idea.
That's what I'm expecting.
So we're going to pause right here for a second and take a commercial break. So let's hear it from our sponsor.
Hey listeners, Josh Hayes here, co-host of Keystroke Medium. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Sci-Fi Shenanigans. I tell you, we're really excited about what JR and Chris are doing with the podcast and are proud to feature them as part of our podcast partner network. When you get done listening to this episode, I'd like to invite you to come check out our own podcast at keystrokemedium.com. You can find all our previous episodes and check out all the amazing authors we've had on the show. If you're free on Mondays, mark your calendars for 11 a.m. Come hang out with us as we talk to today's leading science fiction and fantasy authors and other industry professionals. We've got a great live audience who get into a lot of shenanigans of their own, as JR and Chris can attest. That's every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, live on Keystroke Media. We're going to talk about some reading, we're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between. And now I'll let you get back to some more shenanigans with JR and Chris. Have a great day.
So, Tim, I'm wondering, before we transition out of Human Legion stuff, do you have any plans for an RPG?
No, but I'd love to have one. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, if you had one, what would you base it on? Dungeons and Dragons, Traveler, which role-playing engine?
I am pretty out of date with RPGs. I mean, Traveler's the obvious one, or GURPS. I mean, GURPS sort of tends to work with everything. One of somebody posted on my website the other day talking about precisely this, an RPG. There are only plans, and it would fit really well. And he mentioned a system that I didn't even know. So I'm afraid I am a little bit out of date with this, but I would absolutely love to do that. And I'd like to I would like to write the source book, but like that.
Oh, that would be great.
With wonderful illustrations.
So how many hit points would Arun get?
All of them.
So I liked him because he was sort of different, Chris. If you read his series, in a world where sort of they super engineer the Marines to be, as perfect as we could, he was the odd man out because he thought. So basically, in a sea of Marines, he was basically
good. So like they are now.
So in a sea of Marines, Arun would be like the soldier. He was the one that thought.
Okay.
Well, there was a reason for that.
We do that, Tim. We like to give each other a hard time. That whole inter-service rivalry thing.
Yeah, don't hold back.
So, other than the Human Legion stuff, I know you had mentioned you have written some fantasy, but you've also talked about anthologies that you've been in. So what all anthologies are you in, and what kind of stories are you telling in those?
Well, I've lost track, actually. I one of the first anthologies I was in actually was what's it called? Welcome Home Janissary. Have you heard about any of that? Either of you?
I've read it.
Yeah. So that originally came out in an anthology by a bunch called Newcom Press, and so that was actually a Human Legion short story before I started writing the novels. So if you look closely, it does actually feature Aaron McEwen. You've mentioned his mother is the main character in this one. I've written all sorts of other things, tend to be science fiction. I did one in the Explorations anthologies a few months ago, British Press. That was The Light of Distant Earth. That was really great fun, sort of big scale science fiction after the Earth has been lost, and lots of pathos. I quite enjoyed that one. I did a Four Horsemen one, as you know, and that's why I'm running a novel now with the same characters. But at Christmas I wrote a short story for a group called the Syndicate, who excellent bunch of authors who write pulp style fiction, or at least that's in the Syndicate anthologies. They do write other things as well independently. So this was a Cthulhu H.P. Lovecraft themed one. So I wrote it based in the house where I used to live in Birmingham in England. So it's rather odd. I never thought when I lived there back around about 1990-91 that I'd end up writing a story based in that house. I had to slightly adjust the house number, of course, but yeah, that's from when I used to live in Birmingham. There's cosmic gods, and everyone goes mad, and yes, absolutely nuts.
I I don't know. I've read because I've been trying to get back to the classics, so I've read the Cthulhu novels. So it's definitely, I like the modern interpretations of it better than his original.
Yeah, it goes on a bit, and some of it's a bit awkward in places, but yeah, but the idea I think is, it builds up nicely, and then it's all a little bit freaky. I do like that.
I think some of it's just stories. Some stories just age better than others. I wonder how that would have been received, the Cthulhu stuff, when it was first written.
Well, I've obviously been looking at exactly all that sort of stuff because I had to remind myself what I was supposed to be writing, and it wasn't very well received at all. And I got an H.P. Lovecraft or Cthulhu mega pack, I think, and started reading all this stuff. And most of the stuff he wrote was rejected, I think, until after he died. But it was his friends who then sort of carried it on during I don't know when he died, but he was quite young, wasn't he? But the pulp writers of the 30s and 40s were carrying it on after he died, and probably it's the fact that they were pushing it so hard and were, they were top writers of the day, that it really has the impact still. I mean, if you talk to anybody down the street and you say, "What does Cthulhu look like?" they will say, "Tentacles, rubbery head," and they don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. So the Explorations anthology. Now, have you been in all of them?
No, just one. I've read them all, but I've just been in the one.
I've read them as well, and I've enjoyed them. But Nathan Heisted, if I remember correctly, he's the publisher, correct?
Yeah. That's right. Yes.
He picked some sexy covers for those.
Definitely.
So
Tom Edwards.
They're Tom Edwards covers. Okay.
I don't know who the first one is, but certainly the last two, maybe more. Definitely Tom Edwards. So the one I was in, got quite a moody, dark blue it's dark, and all the people have got torches. Flashlights. I don't know what continent I'm on at the moment. Yeah, that was the Tom Edwards one, and it was a bit different because it does so well with the spacecraft in space, often with another one having a battle. I thought it was great to see him do something a little bit different. Still excellent spacecraft design, but then with people going off exploring, and because it's all about colonization and dangerous new planets.
I was impressed with the covers. They definitely suck you in. So we will include that link for the landing page for that series of anthologies in the show notes, people, if you want to go check those out yourself. They are definitely worth looking at. So, but you mentioned before we talk about the Four Horsemen stuff, because that leads into your next series, were there any other anthologies that you have done?
Yes, but I can't remember them all. I'll tell you, the first one I was in actually was set in Northampton. Strange enough, for bizarre reasons that aren't important at the moment. But the most famous author in Northampton is Alan Moore, who's a chap with a big beard and funny coat who writes comic books. So he's very famous, and that was my first book signing. And we had, 100 people all desperate with their pens to get anything they could get signed. And I happened to sit next to him. And I lent him my pen, which leaked all over him. But it was a great feeling to be in this, which is a bit bad because he had this sort of frock coat on. It was all very glamorous, but I might have stained it. Sorry, Alan. But to be on the signing table with hundreds of people, well, not hundreds, but a lot of people lined up, that was a great experience. And the fact that they're all coming to see the person next to me who happened to be in the same anthology was just a coincidence. But I really enjoyed that. Yeah, so that's my favourite anthology, I think.
Okay. So you've also written in the Four Horsemen anthology, the same one that Chris and I were in, for a few credits more. So you mentioned that story becomes the series that you're writing right now. So how did you get the idea for that story? Where'd that idea come from for you?
Well, I went to the pub on a Monday night and I had some beer served at the correct temperature, and it just popped in my head. what I used to do that. I used to really dislike my job. I found it really stressful, and that was kind of my escape. I would, even if I didn't do any writing during the week, I'd have a couple of pints and take my little notebook and write some stuff. It would turn into short stories. That was my escape. So I kept that going. So rather than do all the hard work, that's what I did. Me thinking about what am I going to write next. So yeah, that all just popped in there. I was trying to think about 2000 AD. You always had mercenary characters and this sort of stuff, but I couldn't think of anything. But this popped in. So I'm now writing a one-off novel for Chris and Mark in the Four Horsemen universe that takes those characters and then does something that slots into the story arc that's carrying on between novels. I mean, it would be nice to think that there will be other stories for those characters, but it's not a series, not at the moment anyway. It's a one-off.
Okay. So, is there anything about that one-off that you can tell us about that isn't, covered by NDAs or any non-disclosure agreements or anything like that? I mean, how much? Tell us as much as you can. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you've not read the Four Horsemen, then really what you like, you should do. But the basic premise is it's in the nearish future, and there are human mercenary companies that go out and work contracts. And there are 4 key ones called the Four Horsemen. So the first 4 books in the series relate to those 4 ones. And then when you read the 4th one, Golden Horde, there's a big change at the end. A big event happens, and you realize that something's been happening in the background of the previous books. So the world of the Four Horsemen is slightly different. They are, if you like, now the Four Horsemen are under pressure and they're sort of up against the ropes, but they're not giving up. They're doing something about it. Well, my book is set a little bit further on, and so although the Four Horsemen don't directly appear in that book, it's a consequence of what happened in Golden Horde and what the Four Horsemen are doing about their situation. So hopefully, if all goes well, then some of the things that happen in my book will then feed into further books.
Okay.
I hope. That's the plan.
I'm going to have to reread The Golden Horde so I can begin to speculate as to what your book might be about.
So, I'm now in the same situation that you were, Sarah, in the sense of how you're going to fit into the overall story arc, because it's not a sort of spin-off. It does sort of fit in. So I did pitch it. I said, this is exactly what I want to do, because I was quite concerned that it'd be a good story, but it wouldn't slot in. But hopefully that all works well. It will be part of the pivot from the first sort of set of stories into the next arc of the story. And that's about as much as I can say.
Excellent.
All right. So the any plans or any idea on as far as publication? I know when you're publishing with other people, you don't always get as much say in that, but what's the timeline, do you think, on that? You mentioned you're writing it now?
I am currently tidying up. So it's written. I'm at the stage where I'm having to do a bit of rewriting because I've developed some of the characters later on in a book that when I first wrote them were just sort of second mercenary from the left sort of thing. So now I'm going back and tying up the different parts. So I'm in a minor rewrite, and then it will be a final tidy ups, and then I think that Chris will be publishing it. Basically, when I deliver him a manuscript that I say is finished, as long as he likes it, then it will go out very soon afterwards. He's got the artwork already. So I'm reluctant to put a date on it, but it won't be very far away and might be coming out, very probably will be coming out before the final Human Legion book.
So the artwork, for anybody that wants to, we will list Tim's contact information. And if you scroll through his author page, you can see a picture of the cover. And it's a pretty sexy one. So I know I say that about a lot of artwork, but I'm easy to please. What can I say? So
Yeah, you wait for the Lego version because my son's going to do he's got a whole lot of posable Caspers, the sort of mini mechas made out of Lego. So we're going to do that scene in Lego. It's going to be excellent.
I'll say so, Chris. You might be missing it if you follow Tim on his Facebook page. His son is always like he wants to be a Lego engineer, and so he's always building things. So he's like building robot Legos that are like functional. It's amazing. He's built giant ships and mechs, and so he decided to make a when he was here. I don't know. Does he read these stories, or you just tell him about them?
I tell him about them. Yeah, these ones. Yeah.
So he was writing
he's
these.
into Rick Riordan, I mean. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, who isn't? But he's been making Lego models of all this stuff, and they're actually quite good. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
So
well, they're actually good enough now that you can map out the battle scenes as you're sort of writing them.
Oh, that's
outstanding!
great.
So you can get your own sand table. So does he charge you for these?
Yeah, he's not cheap.
So, all right. Well, I guess, are there any other books in the horizon that you want to talk about before we talk about some other nerdy goodness?
No, that's me all done.
Okay, so enough shameless plugging about your stuff. So, what are you reading in the larger science fiction genre?
Well, funnily enough, I have been reading Four Horsemen books and H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu books because I've needed to, and I've thoroughly enjoyed them. But also, as I've mentioned, Galaxy's Edge. Currently, right at the moment, I'm reading Tech Mage, I think, by Chris Fox.
Oh, that was good. Yeah,
which is really good. Who else have been reading? Really into Jodie Taylor, who writes Chronicles of St. Mary, which is at times a sort of a light sort of time travel adventure series with some sort of historians, but it actually gets very dark at times and very science fictional. I think they're great books, and I was very pleased to see actually you have come across the Goodreads Reader Choices. So Goodreads do a Reader's Choice Awards. They've just done last year's. I was very pleased to see Jodie Taylor up there in the finals. So she's doing really, really well, broken into the mainstream.
Any relation?
So highly recommend. I wish. Yeah. No, not at all. No, I think I mentioned Dennis E. Taylor with his Bobbyverse things. I think no, not really either.
You should charge them to use your name. I mean, come on, people, get with it. Pay them a little bit.
I'm worried to be the other way around.
Well, as long as it helps people find your stuff, it's all good. So, do you think, besides the Syndicate anthology, do you think that Lovecraft story is going to influence any of your stuff going forward? Or,
well, it's the first time I've ever written a horror story. I guess you'd call it a horror story, but for me, it's really sort of weird, strange things happening, adventure, peril. So it's sort of, I don't know, it's just a slightly different take on what I've been writing anyway, I guess. I would like to write, I have written fantasy stuff, but I'm just having too much of a ball writing the space opera kind of stuff that I've got plenty left to do there for a time being.
So I was sort of envisioning you writing something along the lines of Aliens, right? So you got the horror monster in space. I could see Lovecraft fitting well into something like that.
Yeah, there was a Cthulhu in space anthology came out quite recently. So
really?
Yeah, definitely these things will work. Yeah. Well, I saw a Kickstarter for it. I don't know if it actually went out. I think it probably did. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I think about it. Well, yeah, I'd like to write that. I've got 1,000 things I'd like to write. And you never know. One day I might do exactly that. Yeah. I've never suffered from a lack of things I would like to write or ideas. I would like to write quicker so I can get more done produced and see how they work out.
Sure.
So we all.
Of all the subgenres of science fiction, because now there's science fiction fantasy and lit RPG, where do you see the market going? What do you think is going to become the most popular in the next few years?
I think the Tech Mage I just mentioned, that's from Chris Fox.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a sign of things to come. That's space opera sort of thing. I've been writing maybe a bit of Warhammer 40,000, and they have spell guns and spell armors and ancient gods and worms and space and stuff. I think that's something that's become, I think what's popular in 2017 is a trend that's definitely going to continue. And in part it's because although there's been a great growth in science fiction in sales in the last few years, I think it's been even bigger with fantasy, particularly with urban fantasy and paranormal romance. So the sort of thing where they were a big mashup between all these different ideas. So sexy vampires and covert operations all mixed up in the same sort of thing. I think that's going to be important because it's going to reinvigorate people who might have read a lot of space opera, alien invasion books, or read a lot of paranormal romance, and just the sort of infusion of new perspectives by mashing them all up together. I think that's going to be a big trend. I think it already is. I think that's going to increase. But I mean, obviously, with lots of trends, you can have several going on at the same time and contradictory. And I think there's also been a trend to more hard science fiction, more concentration on engineering and science, and being interested in how space works. So Andy Weir is perhaps the best example of that. So I haven't read his new book, Artemis, but I mean, that's something people seem to be saying is a really exciting thing because he's put a lot of thought about how things would actually work if you lived on the moon, rather than just having it as a backdrop to something else. So I think that's another trend as well. It's still continuing.
So that's interesting because when Chris and I were talking about this, we were actually thinking that the trend would be towards, more character-driven stories that are sort of more just about escapism and having fun, as opposed to the hard science fiction or the message fiction. We thought maybe, given how tense things are in our daily life, people would want to escape to books that go the opposite direction, sort of along the lines of the Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah. Yes, Galaxy's Edge. I do think that it's one of those things that when you see somebody who's really good at what they do, they make it look easy, and I think that is a perfect example of that. The way there's so much, so few words, I think is excellent. That yes, there's a sense of realism for some of those books, in the sense of it's believable, it all feels plausible, the people feel plausible. In fact, the people feel plausible all the way along. But some of the sort of hard science kind of things about how does the spaceship work, it's a bit like Star Wars. Well, we don't really know, and it doesn't really matter because it's not important for that particular story that they want to tell. But something such as Artemis, the Andy Weir story, or the Martian one, I mean, I think that people will look at that, and of course it's on another world, and even though there's a concentration or an emphasis to some degree on the practical realities of what it would be like, I think that's escapism as well, because it's more than we've all seen, the moon as a backdrop to a TV show or whatever, but we don't often get a feel for what it would like to really live there. It's just a screen in the background. And I think that's a form of escapism that I think is very important. But I think you're right. People perhaps are less inclined for, I don't know, a little bit more binary morality, the good guys and bad guys, perhaps, and a little bit less reflection on some of the things that are going on outside in their door in real life, unless that's what they want to read at the time. And I think one of the things I've learned about readers' habits is that the same person one day will want to read one thing, the same person will want to read another thing, but they're actually working in different markets. So I think about different book markets, and I think that's what's going to happen. People who want to read the angst-ridden stuff will do so, but more often they're going to be reading the escapism.
Right.
Okay.
Have you ever read any comic science fiction, such as like Space Team by Barry J. Hutchinson?
Oh, no. No, but he's going gangbusters with that, isn't he? Yeah. I have read, but not that particular one. I sort of grew up on Hitchhiker's Guide, so
that was great too.
yeah. 2000 indeed had a very strong sort of sense of humour, dark humour running through a lot of the things. So yeah, I like to mix it up with a bit of humour, but I haven't done just recently.
Okay.
I've actually got a story along those lines. So the MD Cooper has his Pew Pew anthologies that were supposed to be sort of the humor, and I submitted one, and I know how to do humor one way, and it's very barracks appropriate, probably not mixed company appropriate. And so I submitted the first couple thousand words, and I'm like, am I wasting my time if you're not going to accept it? And he's like, well, that's maybe a little too much for us. And so I had it sitting there, and I was like, well, I had just finished book 4 in the Sleeping Legion, and I needed something to get my mind clear before I went into the edits. So I wrote this story, and then I realized it was maybe a little too crude. So a good friend of mine, TM Toombs, she used to write humor for newspapers and stuff. And so she's going to go through with and co-write it with me so we could tone it down so it's fit to print. So, yes. I wonder if the 10,000, if it grows, or if we end up with a 2,000 flash fiction or something by the time she helps me clean it up and make it
one paragraph.
Yeah. But it's definitely a challenge to write. I think so my hat's off to Barry, because with the difference with regular science fiction, I think, and the comic stuff is that every word matters now. It's not just what you're saying in the sentence, but it's also got to be layered with the innuendo and all of that. And it's definitely a challenge to write.
Yeah, and you need a lot of confidence that you're going to bring the audience with you. And because you can't, I know some stand-up comics, you can't second guess what people are going to like. You've got to go for it with absolute confidence. And I did try to put dark humor in the Revenge Squad books. Some people liked it, and some people didn't. But I'd rather do that and win an audience of people who really got the humor and loved it than not have anything and then make it perhaps a little bit bland. So I think you do need to take risks.
You did in Marine Cadet as well. They Chrissy, they have a scene in the beginning where they're doing a training battle, and they have drugs that they give the Marines to keep them fit to fight if they're injured and such. Mm-hmm. And there are some unintended biological consequences of those drugs. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody, so we'll just leave that there. But there was I remember reading that in the waiting room at the VA, because that's where I was waiting while they were trying to figure out what the heck was wrong with me. I spent a lot of time in waiting rooms at the VA, and I remember reading that and laughing out loud, and everyone turns to look at me like, "Uh-oh, another one of those crazies." I'm sure. So it was definitely that's in there. I think those are was that intended when you wrote that to be funny, or was that just something you did as a plot device?
Yeah. No, that was intended to be funny, and I did wonder, have I gone a bit far on this one? But yeah, I think I like to have a little bit of dark humor, because it lighten things up a little bit and make a bit of dark and light with the sort of the feel of it.
Well, gallows humor is definitely something that fits with the military, and so for military SF, it definitely works. So, well, we ran a little bit longer than we thought, so I will save the discussion about the Four Horsemen stuff that you're writing, and we'll have to definitely have you back to talk about that when you can say more. So we've got the standard question we like to ask all the science fiction writers on the way out the door. Are there any new scientific breakthroughs you're following or excited by right now?
The bit I'm excited at the moment is what's going on in space. I think there's so much improvements recently of our observational data. We're learning stuff all the time, and there's the thing that's happened recently with the super black hole that's eaten the galaxy, paused for a bit, and then sort of belched out sort of great big plasma clouds, and then done it all over again. And it's when you see something like that, and I think, well, they can't understand why that's happening. So they've got to go and figure out all the theory again. I I kind of like the fact that we're seeing things we haven't seen before. I also like the fact that some of them just still can't be explained. So there's still mystery and plenty of things to learn and be surprised by out there, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding. Well, for us, for Chris and I, we've talked about this. Is one of the reasons we asked that is because, science fiction is one that's genre that's definitely influenced by the real science, and then you just sort of extrapolate what could be, whether it's whimsical or hard SF, but it's rooted in what is and what could be. So, on that vein, Chris, did you have anything besides the self-driving cars that you're going nuts about?
I'm intrigued by, well, we're actually going to have an episode on this, but I'm intrigued by the recent collision of the neutron stars and how they detect gravitational waves. And just the whole fact that we still don't completely understand gravity. We've got a pretty good idea, but we're not sure yet. I love that part.
Yeah. I was reading a study. We've recorded a couple science breakthrough episodes of what was big news for 2017, where we've got one left before we just go with those episodes being just what's current. And so we've been doing a lot of prep for that. But the one I've been watching that recently came out is there was a recent discovery that the ozone over the poles seems to be healing itself. I find that fascinating, partly because I wonder how that's going to affect the interpretation of the science, because I know anything lately, at least when you talk about science and the environment, it's definitely become political. So I want to grab the popcorn and watch how this report plays out with the masses.
Right. And
just sort of, I don't know if Nero really fiddled while Rome burned, but I definitely understand the sentiment. So, but Tim, since we ran long and we're going to have to potentially split this up into other episodes down the line to keep talking to you, where can listeners find you?
Best place to find me is at humanlegion.com.
All right, and we've got all of his links in the show notes, so if you don't have a pen handy, you could certainly just follow those. And Chris, do you want to tell us where they can find us?
Sure. Our website is www.sfshenanigans.com, or Twitter @SFS_show, and our email is podcast@sfshenanigans.com.
Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Chris Winder, I'm J.R. Handley, and this was the Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of space and all things that go boom. All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that archived episode that was in the digital memory hole that we found. We thought you'd enjoy it. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the archive for the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back at our regular scheduled time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.